There's a fellow, he went to apply for a job, and he was talking to his friend after he got back from his application. He says, I went to apply for this job, and the manager had the nerve to ask me if my punctuation was good. And his friend says to him, he says, so what did you say? He says, well, I told him I've never been late a day for work in my life. Oh, you guys, you missed it. But have you ever felt like you are on Abbott and Costello's baseball team? What's on first? Who's on second? I don't know who's on third. I don't care, is that short? Just out of the picture. Years ago, our family is big into games. I think I've told you that before. My mother would make me play games with her till all hours of the night, so that there's a little kid who's 10 is begging to go to bed. I want to go to bed, Mom. I got to go to school in the morning. It's all right, Stevie. I'll give you a chocolate bar if you play one more game of aggravation with me. Or I'll give you a Hot Wheels. You'd pull out these Hot Wheels at midnight. Go, Steve, just play one more game. We love to play games, all right? And we love to laugh. Our family loves to laugh. And we had this game when I was a kid. It was called Concentration. I don't think they make it anymore. And what it is there's a bunch of cards on this board, and it's like a memory match game to begin with. You pick up, and here's a beach ball, and number 1 and number 27 is a beach ball. You get to pull them off, and underneath there is a puzzle. And then if you manage to match a pair, then you get to take a guess at what this puzzle is. If you guess what the puzzle is, then you win that particular round. Well, we got playing this game, and I matched these pairs, and most of this puzzle was revealed underneath. And there was a picture of a nose plus Mo, M-O, plus this picture of a king. And I'm looking at this thing there, and I said, what does it say? I'm looking at it, and it goes, Nose, Mo, King. Nose, Mo, King. And my brother says, well, say it a little faster. Nose, Mo, King. He got it. No, he doesn't have it. What does it say? Nose, Mo, King. Nose, Mo, King, nose, Mo, King, nose, Mo, King, nose, Mo, King, nose, Mo, King. I got it, nose, Mo, King. I could not get it. I could not get this, that it says no smoking. But I'm looking at this, no smoking. And it became kind of a landmark in our home, all right? We kept going back to this game years later. I remember when you couldn't get that no smoking? But have you ever had one of those no smoking moments? It's actually the title of my message, No Smoking Moments, all right? Where you just don't get it. It's there, and you're just not getting it. As we've been going through the book of Mark, and we get to, as I got to this passage, I'm thinking, you know what? I just taught the feeding of the 5,000 a couple of weeks ago, because it's just a couple chapters, chapter 6. How can I go and teach this feeding of the 4,000 is almost the same as the feeding of the 5,000? And why are they here? Actually, the feeding of the 5,000 is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The feeding of the 4,000 is just in Matthew and in Mark. It's not in Luke and in John. All right? And so what am I going to do? What is in here? But you know what? There is nothing in this book by accident. There is nothing in this book that is just here as a filler to make it a little bit longer. It's not there, okay? We don't want to skip the details. God put that here for a reason, and it's because a lot of us may have those nose mo king moments, all right? Do you ever need to be, wives, do you ever have to repeat something to your husband? And they're convinced that you never said it in the first place. Happens in our house all the time. But she really hasn't told me the first time. I want to show you something that's rather unique here. As I really got looking at this text, and again, this blessed book is inspired by God. Every word in it is inspired by God, and we can trust it. And it's there, like I said, for a reason. When I got looking at this account is almost the same. The same things happen in order, okay? In Mark, in chapter 6, verses 30 to 44, Jesus feeds a great multitude. In chapter 8, 1-9, Jesus feeds a great multitude. 5,000 in the one multitude, plus women and children. 4,000 in the other multitude, plus women and children. Okay? Immediately following this great feeding, there is a boat trip in Mark 6:45-56. And then we see that in Mark chapter 8, verse 10. After the boat trip, there's a confrontation with the Pharisees. Same order. Feeding of the multitude. Get in a boat. Confront the Pharisees. And after that, there is a conversation about bread. Bread. All right? Following this, and we're going to look at this next part next week, but it's still in the same order, there's a miraculous healing. So we have the feeding, a boat trip, a confrontation with the Pharisees, conversation about bread, and then a miraculous healing. Exact same order, just a little bit later in time, but there's a lesson to be learned. Skeptics try to take this and they try to say, see, the Bible is wrong here. They retyped this in, and Mark messed up. And over here it says 5,000, he says 4,000, so clearly the Bible is contradicting itself. The Bible is not contradicting itself. It's two separate incidents, and there's quite a bit of difference between these incidences. There's the similarities. Yes, the order is the same. But there's big differences. One is 5,000, like I said, it's mentioned in all four Gospels. The other is 4,000 just in Matthew and Mark. But the 5,000 happens in Galilee near Bethsaida. This feeding of the 4,000 happens in Decapolis. In Bethsaida, the 5,000, it's predominantly Jewish people. Here in Decapolis, it's predominantly Gentiles. In the 5,000, there's 5 loaves, there's 2 fishes. In the 4,000, there is 7 loaves and a few fishes. Doesn't tell us how many. In the 5 loaves, there is 12 basketfuls left over. In the 7 loaves, there is 7 basketfuls left over. And actually, the baskets are even different. The one basket, the Greek word that's used, of the 12 baskets, there's a smaller basket. But in the 7 basketfuls, it's actually the Greek word that's used here. These are ones for carrying large amounts of produce. All right, huge baskets. Same kind of basket with the 7 loaves as they lowered Paul down the wall in. Okay, he's not going to go down in a lunchbox, but he's going to go down in this big basket. Okay, this is interesting. In the 5,000, the Jews, God's chosen people, the ones that the Messiah came to, they'd been with him one day. In the feeding of the 4,000, these Gentiles had been listening to Jesus preach for 3 days. For 3 days. These people were so hungry for the word that they were willing to neglect even their own physical hunger. Now, they may have had some food for a little while and then ran out, but you know what? They were staying there while Jesus preached to them for 3 days. Isn't that amazing? Jesus saw their need. Take a look in chapter 8 there, in verse number 3. It said they've been there. And in verse 3 it says, "And if I send them away fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way, for diverse of them have come from far." Many of these people have come from a long way. And if they haven't eaten in 3 days, or however long it's been since they've eaten, and I send them away, they're going to faint by the way, and something had happened to them. Jesus was concerned about their physical needs. Is he concerned about their spiritual needs? Absolutely. Spiritual needs are more important than physical needs, but you know what? We can't neglect our body. I know it looks like I've neglected my body, but this body's bringing home the trophy, all right? Just to let you know. Just kidding. But all right, in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 8, it says, "For bodily exercise profiteth little, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come." It doesn't say that bodily exercise is no use at all, just discard it. It says bodily exercise profiteth little, but it does profit. But what is more important, what is clearly more important, what Timothy is saying here, is that spiritual things are more important than the physical things, but we can't neglect the physical. Jesus had been teaching these people for 3 days. But he's not going to neglect that spiritual. But you know what? He's not going to just throw away the physical. He says, you know what? These people need some food. These people need some nourishment before I send them away. Some of them may have to walk 2 or 3 days before they're going to get to where they're going to go. All right? My dad had this little saying, when it used to be that says, some people are so heavenly minded that they're no earthly good. We need to be aware of what's around us, and we need to take care of ourselves physically. But we have a job to do while we're here. We have a job to do while we're in this life, and it's the only chance that people have of turning their hearts over to Jesus Christ. And if we know Christ as if you know Christ as your Savior, you need to tell other people about that, because this is the only chance they have. Here's this physical. We're on this world. God created us. He created us with needs, that fuel that we need, the water that you need, the exercise that we need. He created us that way for a purpose. Spiritual is more important, yes. But you know what? We have these physical needs. And we need to be here not just focusing just on what I can do and how I can grow for the Lord, and not use that exercise to tell others. We need to tell others. We're getting back, someone just mentioned to me this morning, the weather's starting to turn back. We can get into full force and handing out our John and Romans again, and trying to get the book of the little booklets that have the book of John and the book of Romans in every home in Brantford. And hopefully we can do that before next fall. That's kind of the goal. It changed from 3 years down to a year and a bit. So we're going to see if we can do that. But you know what? It's important that we spend time trying to reach other people, not focused on ourselves. Church is not us four no more, okay? That's not what church is about. The church is to come here and to grow for the Lord, and then to go out and to reach other people for Him, all right? There's a need. There's a physical need, all right? Jesus cares about your physical needs. Cares greatly about your spiritual needs and holding God as first. But He also cares about your physical needs. These people, if I send them away fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way. They come from a long distance. We need to take care of their physical needs. In Psalm 103, verse 14, it says, "For He knoweth our frame, He remembereth that we are dust." He created us. He knows what we are. He knows that we are feeble creatures. He remembereth that we are but dust. He knoweth who we are. In 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7, it says, "Casting all your care upon Him, for He careth for you." God cares about you. Jesus cares about you. So He says to His disciples, He says, all right, we got to feed these people. There's 4,000 of them, plus women and children. It tells us that in Matthew account. It says there's 4,000 plus the women and children. But he says, what have we got? What have we got to feed these people? And they're looking at, we got 7 loaves. We got 7 loaves of bread here. And the disciples answered, verse 4, it said, whence can a man satisfy men with bread here in the wilderness? And He asked them, how many loaves have ye? And they said, 7. We've got 7 loaves. All right. So Jesus tells them in verse 6, He commands them to sit down. He shows them that He gives thanks after the people are sitting down. It's quiet. They're looking at Jesus, and He instantly, He's going to give thanks. And I'm sure that He looked up into heaven, and that's what He would do when he was telling people. It's not that we have to look into heaven. If you're driving down the road and you have to pray, don't stick your head out the window and pray like this, okay? Don't close your eyes while you're driving down the road, but you can still talk to God. All right? So Jesus, he got them to sit down. He gave thanks. He broke the bread. He handed it to His disciples, and His disciples spread it out to the people. Same order that He did with the feeding of the 5,000. As Yogi Berra said, it's deja vu all over again. Okay? But it's the same thing. It's the same order that He's doing. Okay? Breaks the bread. He gives thanks. He lets them sit down, gives thanks, breaks the bread, hands it to His disciples, and His disciples hand out the miracle that Jesus has done. The miracle didn't happen in the disciples' hands. The miracle happened in Jesus' hands as he handed that food out to those people, to the disciples, and the disciples handed it out to the different people. Okay? They went and they collected afterwards, like I said, 7 basketfuls of leftovers. Way, way, way more left over than they started with. Like exponentially amount more than they started with is left over after thousands of people have eaten. That's God. That's God. They get into a boat and they head over to Dalmanutha, and they get there. Verse 10, and straightway he entered into a ship with his disciples and came into the parts of Dalmanutha, And the Pharisees came forth and began to question him, seeking of him a sign from heaven, tempting him. You know, it's amazing. As with these Pharisees, they're looking for a sign from heaven. They want something different. They've seen all kinds of different things that Jesus has done. They basically set him up in Mark chapter 3. When on the Sabbath day, they knew that Jesus was going to heal somebody if they can. And they had this man there, and they were watching. Remember when we talked about the man with the withered hand? He had that forever. And as he got there, as Jesus got to the synagogue, the Pharisees are already sitting parked and watching. They say, he's going to heal him, and it's the Sabbath day. So they watched him heal this man. They watched him cast out demons from people, and they watched him heal other people. He'd raised some people from the dead. He did all kinds of great miracles. And you know what the Pharisees wanted? We want another sign. But this time, yeah, you can raise dead people, big deal. Yeah, you can heal a leper by just, by touching them. You can heal the deaf people, you can heal the blind people, but, we don't believe that stuff. We want to see something spectacular from heaven. We want a sign from heaven. We want to see fire streak across the sky, or I don't know what they wanted, but they wanted something different than all the many miracles that Jesus performed. Just fed 4,000 people with 7 loaves of bread. Okay? We don't need to pack much when we're taking to eat. All right? We can feed 4,000 with 1 loaf of bread, with 7 loaves of bread. We're laughing. Jesus turns to those Pharisees. The Pharisees came forth in verse 11 and began to question him, seeking of him a sign from heaven, tempting him. They're tempting him. They wanted to test him, not to really see who he was. They wanted to trap him. They couldn't trap him. Jesus was who he said he was. He's God. And he sighed deeply in his spirit, and saith, why doth this generation seek after a sign? Verily I say unto you, there shall no sign be given unto this generation. I've done all these miracles. I've done all these things. Why are they seeking for another sign? Another proof. People do that now. God has given us this book, infallible book, and the answers are there for us, and people want another sign. I heard of a fella that, and his opinion was, you know what Jesus needs to do? He needs to come every 20 years or so and die for us. They go, what are you, nuts? Like, he's done that, all right? And they want something else. They want something. If I'm going to believe, I got to see something else. And Jesus looks at here, and he is grieved greatly, because this is the attitude that pervades all of these people here. And he says, he sighed deeply within his spirit. It broke his heart, all right? It broke his heart to see that the people still won't believe. What Jesus went through in order to even come to this planet, to give up the glory of heaven, to confine himself to a physical body that's going to get tired, it's going to get thirsty, it's going to get hungry, it's going to hurt, it's going to suffer pain. People hit him and people do things to him. He's going to suffer pain. He did all that to come from glory, from being omnipresent. He limited what he could know, what could contain inside of a human brain. It tells us that even he didn't know at the time some of the things my father hasn't told me. All right, he knew them before, but he had to limit himself. The constriction that Jesus put on himself, and here he comes and we want something more. You haven't given us enough yet. And it broke his heart. So they get into a boat in verse 13. And he left them, said, I'm not giving you a sign. You've had enough. And he left them, and entering into his ship again, departed to the other side. Now his disciples had forgotten to take bread. And they had in the ship with them neither had they in the ship with them more than 1 loaf. They got 1 loaf of bread. And here's Jesus. All right. Here's Jesus. And he comes to them. All right. And he says to them, he says, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. He's talking about this deadly trap. This deadly trap of what is referred to, and he's talking about the leaven of Pharisees. If you look at leaven is basically like a yeast, all right? And leaven, it's used to make bread rise. I mean, I don't know, I don't do any cooking. I like the smell of fresh made bread, but it's used to make the bread rise. And all through the Old Testament, the item of leaven is pictured as sin. In all of the sacrifices that they were to make, all right, they couldn't have leaven in them. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 19, it says, 7 days shall there be no leaven found in your houses. For whosoever eateth that which is leaven, even that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he be a stranger or born in the land. It's not wrong to have the leaven. But during the Passover time, this is a special time that they had, and special sacrifices that they had to do for God. God says, you can't have leaven in that. In some of the burnt sacrifice in Leviticus chapter 2 and verse 11, it says, no meat offering which ye shall bring unto the Lord shall be made with leaven, for ye shall burn no leaven, nor any honey in any offering of the Lord made by fire. Leaven is just a picture of sin. It's not wrong to have leaven. Okay? It's not wrong to have risen bread. It's not wrong to use it in some other areas. But when it comes to the sacrifices, God says you can't have any leaven because it's a picture of sin. In Galatians chapter 5 and verse 9 and 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 6 says the same phrase is there. It says, a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. It only takes a little bit. It only takes a little bit. And it'll ruin the whole thing. Just a little bit in there ruins the whole thing. All right? Jesus was telling his disciples to allow a little bit of a sin, to allow that in there to remain, will skew all of your perceptions of righteousness. To have that little bit of sin. That's what the Pharisees did. They had unbelief, all right? And they let that change how they saw Jesus. Everything that he would say it's all hinged on they did not believe who he was. He was who he said he was. So Jesus is here and he's telling his disciples this. He's burdened for his friends. He says, look, you can't beware. It says, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Just before this, it says here that he sighed deeply in his spirit. He walks away from these Pharisees. They don't want him. They just want more proof. He gets in the boat. It's still so heavy on his heart that he wants to warn these people. You ever had that, where you just want to warn somebody of something? You ever one of those dreams where you're trying to yell at somebody to tell them to stop and no sound's coming out? It can feel what Jesus is feeling here if you really look at it. And he comes to his disciples and he says, look, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. Here's the disciples. You know what they're doing? They're sitting there going, nose, mo, king. Nose, mo, king. Nose, mo, king. They're clueless as to what Jesus is saying. They miss the whole point. They're in total oblivion. We've got 12 disciples that are blonde all at the same time. I'm just kidding about that. But here they are, and they're saying, Jesus is pouring his heart out. And they're saying one to another, we've only got one loaf of bread. Jesus is mad because we didn't bring enough food. That's why he's kind of angry. Nose, mo, king. You know what? Let's look at Jesus' response. Verse 17. And when Jesus knew it, let me back up to verse 16. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. And when Jesus knew it, he saith unto them, why reason ye because we have no bread? Perceive ye not yet, neither understand, having your heart hardened? Are you guys, what is it you can't see here? Having eyes, see ye not? Having ears, hear ye not? And do you not remember? You're worried about, there's 12 of us here. We've got one loaf of bread, and you're worried. Don't you remember? Verse 19, when I break 5 loaves among 5,000, How many baskets of fragments took you up? And they said, 12. I can imagine them just kind of shrinking back. 12. And Jesus says, and when the 7 among the 4,000, how many baskets full of fragments took you up? This was 15 minutes ago, boys. All right? How many baskets took you up? And they said, 7. And he said unto them, how is it that you do not understand? How don't you understand? Why are you so concerned about the physical? Why are you so concerned about what you can see, what you can touch? And you're missing the point. You're missing the point. Priority number 1 is, like I said in 1 Timothy 4, verse 8, but godliness is profitable unto all things, having the promise of the life that is now, and of that which is to come. That's what godliness is. Godliness is important for now and forever. It says, bodily exercise profiteth little. It does profit, and it is important, and Jesus knows our frames. He remembers that we are but dust. But you guys are missing the big point here. Here is Jesus. He's in the boat. We don't need to worry about, he just fed 5,000 people, fed 4,000 people in 3 chapters. 9,000 people plus women and kids. All right? He's pouring his heart out to them, and these people just don't get it. They just don't get it. Did you ever not just get something the first time? Or the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time, and it's just not sinking in? Just not sinking in. It's why we need repetition. It's why we need repetition. You know, we're going golfing. There's 4 of us heading down to South Carolina after church tonight, having our Baptist week away. We leave after church Sunday night. We get here before church Sunday morning. So we're not going to miss any church. But you know what the golf educators and all those, and you know what they want to give everybody? A repeatable swing. You want to be able to do the same thing each time. That's how you score good, by being able to do the same thing. You repeat it, to be able to repeat it over and over again. Years ago, when James is my favorite book of the Bible, and there's only 127 verses in there, so I thought, you know what, I was younger, my mind was a lot more receptive to this than it would be now, but I thought, I'm going to memorize the book of James. So I'd started, James, and go all through the first chapter, go through the first few verses. I memorized like maybe verses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, I'd come back later and I'd make it to 8, but I'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and then I'd read 9, 10, 11. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I would repeat them over and over again. Now when I go back, I'd have no problem taking you through James chapter 1, James chapter 2. James chapter 3 is starting to get a little foggy. James chapter 4, not as good. You know why? Because there was more repetition on the first part. And that's locked in. It might be there for a long time. I hope it's there forever. But it's that repetition. And God knows what we are. And he knows that we need repetition. That's why he put this here. Took them through the same patterns. Took them through these same things. He's trying to drive this point home. He fed the great multitude. Got on a boat, had a confrontation with the Pharisees, and then a conversation here about bread. You've got to catch this. And it's the final point I want you to see here is that God is long-suffering. He realizes, like I said, that we are but dust. He made us out of dust. He made us out of dirt. And he'll put those things there, all right? He knows that we're not going to get it necessarily the first time. That's why this whole thing is repeated, step after step after step, like Yogi Berra, deja vu, all over again. All right? But it's there. And as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, why am I preaching on this thing again when it's almost the same? But it's not. It's not. There's something else there. And God's word is powerful. And he will give us a second chance. God is a God of second chances. It doesn't matter what you have done this week. It does matter. But you know what I mean? Is that if you come to God, he'll forgive you of what we have done. And wipe the slate clean. And let's try again. Because we're going to fail. Had a lot of conversation this week with a lady about eternal security and several hours actually with this lady about what eternal security is and why it's true. But when you You look at people in the Bible. One that comes to mind right off the bat when we think of somebody who turned his back on God, we automatically think of Peter. You know, he's there with Jesus. I'll never turn against you, Jesus. I am here to the very end. Pulls out his sword, has no idea what to do with the sword. Goes to kill a guy, cuts off his ear. Jesus says, no, put the sword away, Peter. Picks up Malchus' ear and he puts it on his head. He says, all right. Just hours later, a little girl comes up and says, you were with Jesus. No, it wasn't. 3 times. Just people coming up. Wasn't soldiers standing there with a spear and a sword and saying, we're going to take you away, you're with Jesus. No, it was just people. Little girls, just citizens. Hey, I think I saw you with Jesus. Hey, you talk kind of like he does. What did Jesus do when he said, you talk like him? It says that he cursed and he swore. I don't know him. You know why he cursed and he swore? Because he didn't want his language to look like something that belongs to Jesus. So he changed what he sounded like. When they says, you sound like him. Oh no. And off he goes. But you know what? When the rooster made his little tune, and he remembered what Jesus had said, it says that Jesus looked and saw him. And he was up in the castle, and he looked and he saw Peter at the same time. And Peter wept bitterly. And he went to Jesus, and Jesus, not to Jesus physically there, but he got his heart right with God. And God used him in a short period of time later at Pentecost, just a few days later. He preached with great power, and over 3,000 people got saved in one message. Because you know why? God gives us a second chance. He realizes that we're dust. He knows that. He knows we need repetition. But he does that. He gives that. All right? The lesson of believing him here without a sign, all right, tells us the Pharisees, you don't need a sign. It's about trusting him. It's about putting all your eggs in one basket. That basket is Jesus. Because his basket will take care of you, all right? It's placing God first. That's what he wants us to do. It means to place God first. He is above my job. My job is how I supply the funds to eat, but it's not what's more important than God. Putting your job above God is deadly wrong. God says, I need to be first. I need to be above your job. You know what? God says, I need to be above your wealth. It's more important what your relationship is with me than how much money you have. It's more important to have God even above your family. Doesn't mean you don't have a job. It doesn't mean you don't have ways to make ends meet. It doesn't mean you neglect your family. But it means that, when it comes down to it, a choice between I'm going to do what's right before God, or I'm going to just go with my family even though I know what they're doing is wrong. You choose God. God has to be first. You know what God also has to be first of? Your free time. God has to have priority over our free time. We say, well, I don't have time to serve God. We have time to serve God. We need to make time to serve God. If we were to sit down and count how many hours we watch TV, or how many hours we sit and read novels, or how often we sit there and look surf the internet or something like that, we have time. We can serve God. We don't need another sign any more than the Pharisees needed another sign. But what we do need is we need to trust him, and we need to prioritize. We need to put God first. That verse in Timothy. But godliness is profitable unto all things, having the promise of the life that now is, and of that which is to come. We need to put God first. Here's God, here's Jesus, he's God, in this boat with his disciples, expressing to them, you can't have that leaven. You can't let that little thing sneak in, because it'll destroy everything. Little bit of leaven is the whole lump. Don't let that little thing sneak in, and they are missing the point. So Jesus taught it to them all over again. had to teach it to them all over again. He'll teach it to you all over again too. But you know what? We need to put God first. We need to listen. What did Jesus say? You have eyes to see and you don't see, ears to hear and you don't hear. Open our eyes, open our ears, hear what he's telling us from his word, and believe him. Trust him. He is trustworthy. You know why we can believe him? Because when he makes a promise, he always keeps his promise. He has to. It's who he is. It's who he is. Let's have a word of prayer. Precious Father, again, I thank you for your goodness. And Father, I thank you for this time we could spend